Well, good afternoon and welcome to our second Facebook Live here from the Sachsenring. And I can tell you the qualifying sessions this afternoon have been an absolutely crazy affair thanks to one thing. The weather. It's been dry, it's been wet, then it's been half dry, then fully wet, and then dry again. Well, before we get a little bit more into the qualifying sessions themselves, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a view of the pit lane here in the Sachsenring. Yesterday we had a look at the paddock, but if you just wait there, my camera's a little bit too enthusiastic, wants to follow me all the way. I just want to show you very briefly that we have realistically two different types of paddocks here. We have the pit lane, and this is just obviously one pit lane that we've got. You have all of the MotoGP boxes, some of the Moto3 boxes at the end, and some of the Moto2 boxes. However, what is a little bit different about the Sachsenring is if you just come around with me this way and look over my shoulder over there, that is what we have. It's called the paddock number 2. Okay, so that's where we have some more boxes, and those guys, they in between the breaks, some Moto3 teams, some Moto2 have to cross the track and come into the paddock and then start up. That is just one of the, shall we say, curiosities we have here in the Sachsenring, and also on that side we have the hospitality and all those areas. But let's now get into the sporting side of things. Qualifying, absolutely crazy affair. MotoGP, it was wet for Q1, and then coming into Q2, it was still wet, but it was still drying up a little bit, but it stayed wet. And Danilo Petrucci, it looked like he would take pole position, but then heartbreak for him right at the very end. Marc Marquez, who got his 8th consecutive pole position here. That's correct. 8th consecutive pole position. So obviously starting from the smaller classes as well. Now my camera's trying to run away from me. Don't go too far. Come back this way because, let me just say, Dani Pedrosa was in 3rd place. And looking at the Moto2 qualifying that has just finished, that was Franco Morbidelli. He's the guy who also finished what was then once again a wet qualifying session that had started almost dry. So as you can see, a big mix of things. And in Moto3, it was Aaron Canet. Fantastic job, because in Moto3 it was actually Joan Mir on pole. It rained, he decided that was it, but Aaron Canet decided, you know what, I'm going to give it one last go on a slightly drying track, and pipped him. But why have I just brought you into this onto the pit board up here? Well, it's because I'd like to show you a few parts on the motorbike, and this is something which in the wet this season, I'm talking about MotoGP by the way, we've seen a little bit of a revolution. Now if you have a look down here, you will see two different types of brake discs. Hold on, let me just flip this over so you can see it slightly better. Okay, here we have our carbon brake disc. Okay, this is the one, a 340 standard mass, or low mass as they call it, and over here this is a 338, 33.8 centimeter diameter disc. This is 340, so this is just 2 millimeters wider in diameter. This is a disc used for the wet. However, what is the main difference? Why am I telling you this now? Well, it used to be that just the steel disc was used for the wet. Now, why is that? Okay, you can see because carbon material needs to have a certain amount of operating temperature. Okay, so what would happen is with the steel disc, that doesn't need this operating temperature and would have instant bite straight away in cold conditions. And back when that was still the case, and I'm talking about 3 years ago or so, they used to actually run World Superbike discs that were 333 millimeters, and that was sufficient. But tyres in MotoGP just kept getting more and more grip, wet tyres on the front, so the riders were able to push more and more and more until those 333 mil discs started overheating. So all of a sudden we had to go thicker on the steel. They needed more ventilation because they were generating too much heat, and these discs were actually overheating at some point. Now, some teams still use them, but with cooling ducts. They sometimes use them when it's very wet, but we have now seen that from this year, and this is something they started last year, they have started using the carbon disc also in the wet. As you can see, it's such works of art when you look at them so close up. And this is the brand new one. You can see it hasn't even been touched by the pad, which would normally touch around here. I don't know if my cameraman can just see this right now. Now, why is it that they can now all of a sudden use them in the wet? Well, for this disc to work, it needs a minimum operating temperature of around 200 degrees Celsius, okay? So underneath that, the riders would pull the lever and nothing would happen. So That's why when you see them in the wet, they're often covered by this so-called carbon shroud. So the whole thing would be covered just to help retain the heat, retain the temperature. And why bother with that? Why not just say, look, we know the steel discs, they're now bigger, they can now retain, they don't overheat. Why not just use that? Well, that has to do with the feel. Riders like to have the same feel in the first lap and the last lap, and of course the same feeling as in the dry, which is why many riders will prefer to try and use the carbon in the wet rather than go over to the steel, which they say, and I have to take their word for it as I've never ridden with a carbon disc, they say that the steel disc can sometimes, the first touch can be a little bit too aggressive, whilst with the carbon it's often a very more, you start pulling the brake and it's a very progressive squeeze on there. So I hope you've now learned a little something about the brakes themselves, and it's something else if tomorrow, should it be wet during the race, it's another little thing you can look out for on track. Who's got this, who's got that. It often changes from team to team, but I guarantee you there'll be a nice little mix. Now, I can just hear the Red Bull rookies behind me going out on track, and they're going to drown us out any minute now. So I think now is the time for me to say goodbye to you guys and invite you to watch all 3 races tomorrow here at the Sachsenring, which I've no doubt will be extremely exciting. So make sure you tune in either on MotoGP.com or on your local broadcaster. See you then.